On midnight's verge, I text, "Help! I'm struggling for a word. Not a metaphor, not half rhymes. I have fistfuls." Tonight, before deadline's guillotine, I crave silken rabbits out of your scarf-full sleeve. Coins golden from your ears. Surprises to end on. Ever the tease you offer, gigolos.
Hello and welcome back to Meet the Poet. If we have any newcomers here today, you'll get the hang of things very quickly. This is a series where I get to chat to a whole bunch of poets and introduce you to their fantastic writing. So my name is Florrie Crass and I'm going to be chatting with Finola Scott today, who will be reading from her latest pamphlet called Count the Ways. Now, some highlights from Finola's poetic background. She has read at the Edinburgh Book Festival and at the Scottish Parliament. She has twice won the Uist Poetry Prize, and the Stanza Poetry Festival commissioned her work for a multimedia installation. Finola describes her poems as personal and political and ranging from the intimate to the worldview. And this pamphlet takes us through the different forms of love, women's guilt and behaviours, and the idea of family legacies. Now, before we begin, do feel free to drop any comments or questions in the comment box for Finola. And of course, you can drop us a like, you can subscribe to our Facebook and YouTube channels, and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Homestage Poetry. Now let's get started. Hello, Finola, and welcome to Meet the Poet. It's lovely to have you here. How are you today?
I'm great. It's a lovely sunny day outside. So, yes, ready to roll.
Wonderful. So let's start off by hearing a little bit about your poetry background. How did you get into poetry?
Oh, I never started poetry until I stopped working. I have to confess, and I kept it a secret for a while from the poetry world, but I was an English teacher. But it never struck me for an instant that I actually might write something. Perhaps I was overwhelmed by the fact that I was teaching like really good stuff all the time. And it was only when I got retired, I took retirement, I quit work, let's be honest. I thought about different things that I might do. And my daughter was always saying to me, "See that story, Mummy, about her or her childhood or a family story? Why don't you write it down?" So I joined photography clubs and writing clubs and art cinema clubs, and I ended up writing and liked it. So that's what happened. Yeah. It's like a drug.
Yeah. And today you're going to be reading from your pamphlet, Count the Ways. Could you tell us a little bit about it before we hear from it? What spurred it on into creation?
Well, to be honest, during lockdown, I took to dancing in the kitchen every morning to wake myself up and make myself positive. And it struck me that all the songs were about romantic love or sexual love. Now, I had no criticism, nothing wrong with romantic love or sexual love, but there's also all these other dimensions of love that don't often get sung about. They do get sung about, but they don't often. And I just thought that would be quite a nice idea to gather my poems of those into a collection, to consider all the different ways that we love people and the ways that we sometimes stop loving them, and the reasons that we stop loving them or we forget them. So that's what happened. The pamphlet has got a strange brief in that all the poems had to be less than 12 lines long. And I'm a terrible, when I say terrible, I'm an obsessive editor. And I love cutting lines out. That stuff about every word must do something, must earn its place. I'm not saying that is the case in my poems, but it's something that I aspire to. So cutting poems down to 12 lines was
easy peasy.
So the poems.
But can I just ask, just for our viewers at home who won't know, why is it that the poems had to be 12 lines?
Oh, because it's called a slim pamphlet. It's the publisher's design of this particular pamphlet. My previous pamphlet wasn't like that at all, but this particular pamphlet, the publisher decided that was the format he wanted. He wanted a neat, slim pamphlet. So I obliged, I never argue with editors. So, but what struck me was that each of the poems is like a tiny little story. I write a lot of different things, but pretty well all the poems in this pamphlet are moments. And I think that's how I think of poetry. It's a distillation of a moment. Now, you could be distilling the moment to make a political point or an ecological point or any point you want. But for me, it helps if you start with a moment. And sometimes you edit that moment out and leave it just with the kernel. But so it struck me when I was thinking about these poems that they all were like tiny little films. So that's what these ones are. Yeah.
I love that idea. And yeah, each one is its own dedication to this idea, as you say, of all the different types of love. And there's this beautiful inscription at the beginning: to all who have taught me about love, which I think you see obviously cropping up throughout the pamphlet. And I will hand over to you actually to hear the first couple of poems that you've got lined up for us today.
Archaeology of the heart. I'm excavating again, guilt heaped, raking in less obvious, foolish spaces. I should be used to losing. Shame, seers, fishers, all those slack left behinds, surname, job, lovers. Tight-wired, taut-lipped, I scour for that little ring long slipped off mum's finger, gold trusted to me, now asked for by my daughter, to be melted with my thin band, to fuse and flame brightness for the girls. I should be used to losing. Beneath sleeve more. The day heavy with mist in deep lanes, I say goodbye to lost babies, the unbaptized, set apart. This tiny nuke cradles graves and wildflowers, sweet briars. Under rolling sky, fields of lazy beds yawn, sounds of barking tear thought, building nests in shaky walls, families of wrens keep busy.
Thank you, Finola. Beautifully, as you say, beautifully concise poems kept within those 12 lines. And you said that these link together because of their appreciation of family and family love. So I think if we look at the first poem, Archaeology of the Heart, there are a few things in there that I'd love to sort of tease out a bit more and understand more of. I think it begins with this beautiful line and a beautiful image. I'm excavating again, guilt heaped. And I want to know more about this guilt. There are two things in this poem: the guilt and the losing. I wonder if you could explain a bit more these ideas and themes that run through it.
I'm laughing because a friend of mine the other day, we were doing a workshop, and I don't know what everybody does, but while you're in a workshop, you're texting your pals that are on the workshop as well. And we were talking about that guilt ran through a lot of the poems. And my friend said, I think guilt is in every woman's birth certificate, you know? And I think that it's part of the minute you've got responsibility, then built into that responsibility is a sense of failing or succeeding. And I think that in our society, we're not encouraged to praise each other very much. The other day in the shop, actually, there was a mum with her little girl, and the kid was behaving herself beautifully. And I happened to say that. The mum and I were in the queue, and I said, what a lovely wee kid. And I said to the mum, you're doing a good job. And the look on her face, she was astonished. And I think we carry that through. We carry blame through. Even when we're clearly not to blame, we blame ourselves. It must have been something we did. And to be honest, I don't I wouldn't argue that this is a feminist poem, but in a sense it is. I think women tend to get the blame, I blame the mother is a sort of catchphrase. So if there's a breakup or anything, if your children go wrong, mine haven't, but and even my daughter, when the grandchildren aren't well, she's examining what she's doing, what's wrong. And she said to me the other night, I must look at their diet, and I'm going, no, just behave yourself. This is a medical condition. Don't take the guilt on. So, and with guilt goes shame, because you have to admit to having done something wrong. And I'm really bad at that. So
yeah, I mean,
there's a kind of carelessness sometimes when you look back and you think, did I do that? Did I mean to do that? Did I know that would happen when I did that? So that's kind of what the poem's about, really, in a way.
But there's this really interesting line that recurs in the poem. I should be used to losing. What is it? What is the losing? I mean, there's the amazing image of the ring and this being passed down in sort of a legacy. I know that you being a grandmother is important in your life and in your writing. How does the losing fit into that?
Oh, you look back at the people in your life that you lost through carelessness, and you look back at the people in your life that you lost through illnesses, and you look back at the opportunities in your life that you perhaps lost. I am divorced, so you look at that, because nobody sets off to get married thinking, oh well, if it's no use, I'll pack it in. So there's always a sense of shame and loss attached to that, whether it's justified or not. And there's all these other things that you lose. And to be honest, sometimes I'm quite lazy. Well, I don't know if I'm lazy, but you think, oh, is it worth looking for that? Is it worth looking up that person again? And in the case of the ring, when my daughter said, Mummy, I think it's time that you made something out of that ring for yourself. I didn't want that. So she said, right, we'll make it for the girls. Right. And I had to remember where I put my mummy's wedding ring. I was like, I've got it somewhere safe. Where is the safe place? Where do you keep safe things? And you keep them so safely, you maybe don't even know where they are.
So it's a really interesting idea. And then I wonder if maybe let's look at the second poem that you read, which it has these very jarring comparisons of like the newborn versus death, and there's the cradles but also the graves. It feels darker, I think, than the first poem that you read.
Yeah, it's much darker. The first poem I read is kind of positive, because I'm leaving the ring, and the ring is getting fused with my wedding ring, and in fact with my father's jewellery and an aunt's jewellery, and my daughter commissioned this fabulous piece of jewellery for me. So it's very positive, and it looks to the future. This wasn't written a long time ago, but I was at a graveyard in an island called Achill Island, which is off the coast of Ireland. And it's not as extreme as the Aran Islands, but it's getting near it. And I was in this old graveyard, which was beautiful, but it had this section outside it, attached but outside, where the unbaptized were buried, along with suicides. I mean, most people know that suicides don't get buried in the main part of the cemetery, but the unbaptized as well. And I was horrified at that. I thought that was an incredibly cruel act, because not only would a parent have lost a child, but they would have lost the possibility of meeting that child in heaven. Because at that point, the Catholic Church still had something called limbo. Most people know about heaven, hell, and purgatory. And purgatory is like a waiting room. It's like a monopoly. You get sent to jail, but you can get out of jail. But you couldn't get out of limbo. You were literally in limbo forever. And in fact, around the time that I was there, they cancelled that and they allowed the babies to get out of limbo so that the parents could at least meet them in heaven. This poem, it could be about my own loss of babies, or it could simply be about other people's loss. I'm not specific in the poem because I quite like there being a space in the poem for people to bring themselves in. So if this poem speaks directly to them, they can slip in. So it is a condemnation, in fact, of the Catholic Church's attitude to unborn babies, and the unbaptized babies. Obviously, they were born; they were unbaptized. But there's also a link because I talk about lazy beds, and that's an old form of agriculture. And Achill Island is actually full of abandoned villages. The people that lived in the sort of crofts grew potatoes, and they they existed on the potatoes. So when the famine came along, that was it. A lot of them died. So so that's referenced as well. There's a bit of the potato famine in there. And so the bit at the end, it's in two halves. The first half is, strictly speaking, in the graveyard. And the second half is out the world outside the graveyard.
Is that where the form comes in? Because I wondered about the line spacing in the second half versus the first half.
Well, the line spacing, the second half is outside. It's about world continuing, trying to be normal. People keeping on, in spite of this piling up of death at their back. And that's why I had the wall that the wren were building their nests in. The wall is a shaky wall because not even the birds know whether their future is secure. So that's what that. It is a dark poem. It's a miserable.
But it links so beautifully to the first poem in terms of ideas of family and legacy, but also these liminal spaces. You said where is the safe space where the ring was versus the space of limbo for the child. I think that it's a really interesting pairing and a really interesting way to connect them.
Thank you.
And I think it would be good to head over to your next couple of poems that you'd like to read.
Yes. Gosh, I mean, I was going to say they're a bit brighter, but they're not. They're darker. They're a different kind of dark. Yeah, these poems are kind of. I think sometimes when we examine our lives, it's quite often not the big things that matter. It's the small things. Wake up call. You haul me from dream drifting, snug in your tousled bed. I hear your early rise kitchen clatter. I'm a lay-abed, day waster, sloth, you remark, dark dressed in the doorway. I want our mornings to release day's perfume, not this peat, earth-soiled, puer tea you proffer. Aged, brackish, it slaps my mouth. You say I'm drinking time. I taste rot. Revenge, a dish best served. Prepare your whetting stone. Keen-edged is best. Trawl cupboards, freezers. This is a special feast. Rummage below sinks. Find unguents labelled "Keep away from children." Most precious. From the shed, gather "Do not consume" bulbs. Yours will be a different spring. Find that oil brought by smiling guests, long tongues, short memories, when all was well, all was celebration, when love was true.
Beautifully read.
Not all these
Beautiful.
poems, not all the poems in the pamphlet are true. They're not all about me. They may seem first person. But really, I feel that in our society, again, there's certain things expected about women, and you're meant to be civilized and calm and do the right thing. And most of us do. But occasionally, you hear stories about women who do different things and behave in different ways.
I have to say, Finola, actually, the second poem, Revenge, a dish best served. I mean, I will say, I mean, you've described this pairing as sort of an anti-love poem, which is how it fits into this idea of this overarching idea of love. But this second poem, Revenge, a dish best served, it really reminded me of. I don't know if you'll have read it. There's a Roald Dahl short story called what is it called? I think it's something like Lamb to the Slaughter or something like
Yes.
that.
Oh,
Have you?
oh gosh, I used to teach it. It's a fabulous poem.
Oh,
And
fantastic!
you're probably
So,
right.
I
It's
mean,
probably somewhere in the back of my head, you know.
for anyone watching at home who hasn't read it, it's this
Oh,
story of this woman who essentially she bludgeons her husband with like a leg of meat, and she
uncooked.
ends up cooking the
Yeah,
meat and serving it up to the police officers who come and
fabulous.
investigate, and they're saying, "Oh, the murder weapon must be right underneath our noses," whilst they're eating this meat. And it's a fantastic story, and
Yeah.
it really reminded me of
All
this
right.
poem.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
If you want to talk about the first one, the one about the wake up call, I mean, obviously it's got two meanings. Wake up call. I was literally getting woken up with a cup of tea, but it's a wake up call to me about the relationship. And sometimes I've got a series of poems that I wrote after I was talking to a friend. In fact, the poem about my friend is in the book as well, where we were talking over a meal about our lives. And we were just talking about the different things that our exes had done. And I said to her, God, I should have left then. And she said, write that poem. So I did. I wrote a poem, but I just numbered the stanzas because quite a lot of them were small things. It was never enough to say, why am I leaving you? Because you keep bringing me the wrong tea in bed. I mean, you know, most people would say that's totally unreasonable. And maybe it is totally unreasonable. Maybe that's where the shame and guilt from the first poem comes in. You know, how bad was he to you? He just kept giving me poor tea. You know, but for me, it's a kind of indication. If you keep telling somebody you don't like something and they keep insisting on giving it to you because you will eventually like it, you're like, and the first line says you haul me out of bed, and again there's that implied control going on there. So yeah, I'll leave
I
you
mean,
to ask.
I wonder, it is interesting seeing that this is like a response to the first two poems, where this is sort of an empowerment for women. It's a change in the way of female behavior, and yeah, perhaps more menacingly in the second poem,
I
which
think
actually I wonder.
sorry, I
Oh,
just think
sorry,
of that fantastic song. You know, if you like me, put a ring on it. You know,
yeah,
that just so defiant. You know, no, look, let's cut to the chase here. How much do you like me? You know, it's not the ring that matters; it's the commitment that matters. You know,
yeah,
and I just love that song, and I love it when that song comes on and all the women get on the dance floor, and they're just like, it's so empowering. And I just felt that you kind of need to, you know, it's like the opposite of counting the daisies. You know, it's like, no, wait a minute. There's a terrific story. It's a really terrible story. It's this kind of joke where an Arab man is taking his wife across the desert, and she's and the camel's misbehaving, and the camel, the first time the camel, I won't tell you the joke, but it's about noticing small things and
yeah,
noticing them piling up, and I think sometimes when we're in love, we have a selective view of the world and we let things go that we shouldn't let go.
I have a couple of very specific questions that I wanted to ask about the second poem, because there are just a few things that I wondered. I mean, I would love to know more about the images, particularly of the idea of this oil brought by smiling guests and the idea of long tongues, short memories. What does this mean?
Long tongues are about people that might gossip about what's happening, and speculate between themselves what's happening, and maybe spread rumours or feed rumours. And the short memories are, well, they don't remember everything that happened, and they don't remember earlier things that happened. There is a possibility in this poem that, well, it doesn't say who the person is, who's giving this party, whether it's a man or a woman. And it also doesn't make clear who the intended victim is. So it could be that one of the guests is the victim. It could be that the husband is a victim. It could be that they're all the victims, because we don't know what it's revenge for. And I wanted to leave that, again, deliberately open so that you could make up your own story or fit your own story to that.
I like that, and where the reader can become involved in the poem in that way.
Yeah, you can fit your own story, or you can fit another story that you know. I think the main thing is this idea that I remember when I got divorced, my children were not young, they were teenagers. And somebody said to me, whatever you do, don't badmouth your children, your husband, in front of your children. And it was like, what? What? But it was great advice. So it's about that business of people bad-mouthing other people and people listening and passing that on and taking it as fact. And people saying like, oh, did you see what he said? Or did you see what she was wearing? So that's really, and it was just a game then about how you might prepare for this feast. For me, the darkest line for me is the line, yours will be a different spring.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't necessarily mean death. It could be anything. It could be separation or anything, So, yeah.
Well, you have got a menacing way when you need it, I think, in this writing.
It's quite worrying, isn't it? I mean, I do have to say that there are poems in the pamphlet that are pure love.
We have a couple of those actually to hear next. These are more, as you've described them, as actual pure love poems.
These are pure love poems, yes. So I'll read these. Heart glad, in our tent skin, our place o' hod, we coorie close. Our world lies here, we are our world. In a blazing heaven, stars keek doon and wink. Polaris, Capella, Vega, our neighbours bank up the fire. Aboon eternity loops and swirls along the Milky Way. In the mirk derk we hod say, deep in my heart, time stands still. In case of emergency. On midnight's verge, I text, help, I'm struggling for a word. Not a metaphor, not half rhymes. I have fistfuls. Tonight, before deadline's guillotine, I crave silken rabbits out of your scarf full sleeve. Coins golden from your ears. Surprises to end on. Ever the tease you offer, gigolos.
Oh, thank you, Finola. Okay, I want to come to In Case of Emergency in a minute because it's a beautiful poem to end on.
Right.
But before that, I mean, the first poem that you read it in Scots.
Yeah.
And do you speak Scots with people, or do you just use it for writing?
No, I mean, it's one of those questions you can't really answer. I don't think I speak Scots, but other people probably do think I speak Scots. Like most Scots, we have dozens of languages. Like most people, we have double dozens of languages. I mean, I do stress that Scots is a language, it's not a dialect. I also write a lot in dialect. I write a lot in Glasgow dialect. I write monologues. I mean, the format of this pamphlet is not, that's not what I always do. I write in every form. I write prose poetry, all sorts of stuff. And I write monologues. And often when I write a monologue, the voice tells me what voice it wants to be. And this was the case with this poem. It was a love poem, and I wanted it to be honest and real. And so that's the voice I chose to write in Scots. Yeah, yeah.
I love that was. I was just going to say, I love that was the voice of honesty for you in that writing in Scots was when it felt most natural.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, it's odd. Sometimes I play it translating my own poems back and forward, and I find that they have much more energy in Scots or in Glaswegian. They are much livelier.
Why do you think that is?
No idea. Maybe it's because it's not written. Maybe it's because it's more my spoken way of being. And it's one of those things. I used to be, as I say, a teacher, and quite often the pupils don't understand, and I didn't understand that I was speaking Scots until you go somewhere else and you use what you think is a perfectly normal word, and people go, "Oh, sorry, what?" And you go, "What?" You know, you're surprised that there's even an issue, right?
Yeah.
But I just find that sometimes when you translate for instance, that poem into English, a lot of the words are, I don't know, do they call it portmanteau words? They're packaged. One of the words particularly I thought you might ask about was, well, when you talk about your place o' hod, that is actually like a retreat, a refuge. But it's just such a lovely word because it means it's a place where you're held or you can hold. And I just love the imagery of that, a place of hod. Hod meaning hold, right?
That's beautiful.
And the hand say is you could pause. You actually, so under the Milky Way, I paused. So that poem is probably about being in the now in an absolute sense and remembering that now. And so when I talk about the poems being a series of moments, that is the moment. So that moment would be set against the puer moment on the scales of love.
Yeah.
So yeah, and just that whole business, and being able to talk about the tent skin, simply saying that in this tent, it doesn't have the same power for me to think that the tent is like a skin over you both, holding you both tight together, So, yeah.
Oh, I just love the idea of being held by a place and the idea of a place feeling like a home and a place of comfort. I think that's just a beautiful image.
Thank you.
And then your second poem that you read, In Case of Emergency, which I think is stunning and a wonderful last poem to hear. It's got so many interesting sections of it. I love the idea that I'm struggling for a word, not a metaphor, which in my head is quite complicated because you're saying you want a metaphor. You want words that are strong and not not a metaphor. But is language ever really strong and permanent? Are things always double meaninged? And that really stuck in my head. I wonder what you thought about that.
Well, the problem was once I'd written that, I had to come up with a word in the last line that was a
Yeah.
word and not a metaphor, and I'd kind of shot myself in the foot, as it were. But it was just that way that I very rarely ask a friend to give me a word. I'm very, very lucky with the people that I workshop with, because they'll say things like, that line isn't working, or how about you reverse that line? But we don't tell each other what would be a better word, right? Because the minute you do that, it's not their poem anymore.
Yeah.
You can jiggle about with what they're suggesting to you, and you can say to them that isn't working, and maybe, all the stuff. Maybe you're writing your way in, maybe you're summing up, but we don't generally give each other words. So for me to send a thing to a friend at 2 minutes to midnight when the deadline's coming, to say, give me a word, it's really expressing the state of panic that I know that my poem needs fixed. And please, let's break all the rules. Just give me a word. But when I start talking about the scarves up sleeves and the gold coins,
Yeah.
I'm slipping into the imagery of a magician, a stage magician, which in a sense, I think is what we are as poets. And to be honest, half the time I don't know where an image has come from. If on a good day a friend will say to me, that's a great image. Where did you get that from? And I'm like, where did I get? If I knew where I got it from, I would move there. I don't know where it came from, and a lot of it, I think, comes from your own reading and from listening. I probably get more from prose, reading prose. You'll get a really great word, and I don't write it down, but somewhere in your brain it's logged. And so, and quite often the last stage of editing will be challenging words and saying, are you working hard enough? That's a lazy word. You'd be better without that word. Quite often it's an adjective. And you say, well, you'd be better without that adjective. No adjective is better than a lazy adjective. So I just love the idea that the person you're speaking to would be pulling things like a magician. Is this any use? Here's a rabbit? Would that help? Put those away. I don't want those. I just want
Yeah.
So,
I think I just love the idea of this poetic emergency. People often picture writing poetry as this beautifully serene experience, and you're at one with nature, and it just so is not that a lot of the time.
absolutely not. Particularly the deadline thing. The deadline thing is
Yeah.
killing. And you're just about to, you get it all up, and it might say, up to 5 poems. And you go, I've only got 2 half decent ones. Up to 5, please no. And so you wrote about, you get your poems, and you're just about ready to press send. And you just notice that there's something wrong. And you're looking at the clock all the time and thinking, do I have, can I get a thesaurus? Where's the synonyms? So I just wanted there to be that humour at the end. But it's also a poem of thanks to my poet friends. And my poet friends at the moment are probably outside my family. That's my world. And sometimes in lockdown, I don't literally go outside and speak to anybody, but I might have had 20 conversations. And lots of them are about books and poems. They're not all, but lots of them are. And I love that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Finola, I have to say it's been an absolute joy having you on Meet the Poet and hearing more about your work and getting to know you. So thank you so much for chatting with me.
Can I just give a big shout out that I've got a Facebook poetry page?
Absolutely, go
and
ahead.
it's Finola Scott Poems. And I would welcome anybody to join, and they can read anything that I get published, I put up there. Okay?
Yes. I
Thank you
encourage
very much.
everyone watching to go and check that out. And also to everyone watching at home, do leave a comment for Finola if you have any thoughts or questions on her work. And of course, like this video, you can subscribe to our channels on Facebook and YouTube, and follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Homestage Poetry to find out about all of these things. Plus, sign up to the Homestage Poetry mailing list. Lots of things to get on top of there. But just once again, thank you so much, Finola, for joining us. I've had a really, really lovely time with you, so thank you.
Thank you. You've made it very easy. Thank you.
I was in this city, and I saw it didn't love. Queer hatred cruised the streets, gutters washed away its secrets, drains overflowed with guilt. And shame was that thing no youth could name.